Hey everybody, welcome back to Fantasy Theory. So the newest episode of X-Men 97, episode 5, kicked off, and it was great. I said it in my reaction, it was probably my favorite one. Not probably, it is my favorite episode so far of the series. I thought episodes 1 through 3 were awesome. Episode 4 was kind of a dud, and then episode 5 just took it to a whole nother level, and I'm just shocked at it. They teased that this is pretty much just the beginning, and I am so excited to see what they have cooking. But let's jump into the breakdown, talk about the episode, theorize, see some Easter eggs, and just have some fun. So every week I noticed that they have started to add different scenes into the intro, this one being an opening shot of Cable fighting Apocalypse from an earlier episode in an earlier season. They even add back the shot of Storm fighting Callisto, and a shot of Gambit and Nightcrawler fighting side by side. But let's get right into the episode now. Trisha Tilby is the reporter of this episode, and she's interviewing the X-Men. She first interviews Beast and even makes him blush by calling him a great scientist. Jubilee is interviewed after Beast, who says some of the classes they take are big death machines and vampire dinosaurs. Big death machines are the Sentinels we see in the episodes and kind of like some of the main antagonists that the X-Men fight. To play up kind of TV drama, they show Wolverine playing basketball, Jubilee and Roberto, Beast working on some project, and even Scott and Jean going through their relationship rough patch. The UN welcomes the nation of Genosha, and Roberto refers to the last episode when him and Jubilee were stuck there. This was when it was being developed and not what it is now. Magneto, Rogue, and Gambit travel to Genosha in a Blackbird jet, which definitely gives off tension between the three because, well, it's a love triangle. And even Magneto pokes fun at Gambit, saying, should the ship go down, Gambit would be the only one gravity won't be too kind to. Almost like he's trying to impress Rogue at the expense of Gambit. We saw this shot in the trailer, but Genosha has what seems to be a big fancy building, maybe a headquarters or government building, and the outside of it, gigantic statues of both Magneto and Professor X. Around the city, Magneto is praised, it seems to be, but we really get the gist of how it's a sanctuary for the mutants and how happy everyone really is. We see a ton of mutants, some being Leech, Pixie, Glob Herman, the goat, Nature Girl, who was actually on the cover of the Daily Bugle. We recognize her from the antlers on her head. There's some signs for Laser Vision Arcade, could be a reference to Professor X's prodigy, Cyclops, a sign for Sharp Beauty that reads, finally, ... for nails, scales, and horns. You could really tell how comfortable and safe the people feel here. Ice cream vendors, music playing, people smiling, big buildings, and great weather. We get a look at the flag of Genosha and the signs to welcome Magneto and friends, which are completely opposite to what we've seen in the show so far, where the signs usually say negative things about mutants from humans. But this one says, welcome X-Men, mutants matter, and Magneto is right. Dr. Valerie Cooper is there greeting the X-Men, who is voiced by the actress who originally voiced Jean Grey in the original show. And already, so soon, Madeline Pryor, yes, the other Jean Grey, is back. And for the first time this season, we get the return of a fan-favorite character, Nightcrawler, who's just so excited to see everyone, specifically Gambit and Rogue, and the return of Adrian Hoff, who voices him, the same person who voiced him in the original show. Nightcrawler is working in Genosha as kind of a preacher, someone for like religious purposes, and Nightcrawler teleports both Rogue and Gambit to the marketplace, where we see the children whispering something to someone who looks to be not there. But I wonder if it's someone maybe that's an invisible mutant. I'm not exactly sure. Pixie teleports Leech to the fountain, but as people were pointing out, Glob was walking next to them, and then the next shot of them teleporting, Glob is already sitting at the fountain. So I'm curious if this was an animation mistake or what, who knows. We see a mutant who's knocked into the fountain who has red tattoos, not sure who exactly this is, but it looks to be Rainbow pushing her out of the fountain. Rogue says to herself, it's just like how you said it would be, and Gambit says, who, the professor? And she kind of brushes it off and says, yeah, sure, but we know that she is referring to her other love interest, Magneto, and doesn't really want to make Gambit feel bad, and it's just a cold world, I gotta say. Nightcrawler gives Gambit an apple, and Gambit points out that apples cost $10, which is insane, but we won't really get into that. A festival-like event starts where Multiple Man is dancing as well as Exodus. Elisa Tegger steps aside to reveal Dazzler, who was actually referenced last episode where Mojo refers to her, saying that she got a new gig, and I wonder if this is the new gig that they were referring to. Nightcrawler senses Gambit's love for Rogue and says, there is no love without sin. Pretty deep, but he is a faithful man, so it makes sense coming from him. We go back to Cyclops' interview where he is asked about Marvel Girl, who was of course his wife, Jean Grey. During this time, Jean Grey, who I want to point out, has her hair in a ponytail while Madeline Pryor has her hand down. So maybe this is how the animators want us to tell the difference between the two. Logan and her share a moment where he sees Jean Grey using the water to reflect some of her memories. In a very poetic way, in both their dialogues, They are talking about the same moment when Jean Grey becomes the Phoenix and is able to remove Scott's glasses and see his eyes, and they share a kiss. Logan and her share a very romantic moment right after, and she even references how old Logan is and then eventually kisses him. I just want to point out how much taller she is than him because, believe it or not, Logan is usually depicted in the comics as a short king. Logan turns away from her knowing it should be her and Scott and not them two. Trisha the reporter starts to press Scott about him and Jean having a baby, and Scott tries to lie and say that they do not have one. As we know from episode 3, Scott and Jean have baby Nathan, otherwise known as Cable, and give them to Bishop and trying to heal his virus from Mr. Sinister. However, Trisha says she heard from the doctor who delivered baby Nathan, and that's where we see Scott start to snap, and he says that doctor did not want to deliver his baby because he called him a freak. She gets on him for lying about it, and this is where Scott says that humans are ungrateful for the X-Men and they can never just say thank you for them risking their lives, and that he's glad that he's not a human. This is the first time we actually see kind of like a heel turn from Cyclops, and I'm all for it. Back to Genosha, we meet the rest of the Council of Genosha, which includes Sebastian Shaw, Emma Frost, Callisto, Moira McTaggart, and Banshee. Charles is reluctant to accept the position of Chancellor, but ends up asking Rogue to be his queen in all this. Scott and Jean share a moment where Scott says, "I can't see color, but up here I could see big brown eyes and wild rust color hair." Just as we think the couple is starting to make progress, the real Jean Grey realizes Madeline Pryor was trying to reconnect with Scott in their shared subconscious. In their argument, Jean says she turned down galaxies to be with Scott, while, since she's struggling with her memories, the love she's feeling towards him might not be real. Jean refers to Madeline as a piece of her that was cut out, and that Scott loves it instead of her. We get this emotional scene between Rogue and Gambit where she pretty much tells Gambit she chooses Magneto instead. She explains to Gambit how Magneto and her are able to touch because of Magneto's powers. This conversation surrounded by fire, which is kind of, I guess, to me, a little symbolic, and it really sets the mood because it's a pretty emotional scene, like I said earlier. I feel as though the audience, or maybe just me, wants to see Rogue and Gambit together and not Rogue and Magneto. Gambit asks Rogue if she's going to accept his offer, and the framing we see him pull the Queen of Hearts card out, which we see in an earlier episode where he dropped that specific card after he found out Rogue and Magneto were hooking up. I feel they keep putting the Queen of Hearts card in there basically because Rogue is Gambit's queen and the heart symbolizes his love for her. Gambit says to Rogue, and this will come into play later on in the episode, that some things are bigger than touch, but Rogue disagrees. We head over to the gala where you could faintly see the Watcher looking on in the night sky. We see in the night gala tons of mutant dancing, some highlighted being Nightcrawler, Dazzler, Archangel, and Squidboy, who was in a fashionable tuxedo. Rogue appears at the gala in a red dress, and the song playing throughout the gala is the same song that was playing in Madeline's Jean Grey vision when she was using her powers, where she was holding baby Nathan, and foreshadowing, we hear the voice of Cable saying the same thing he said later in the episode, "No, not again. I'm so sorry." This is either her seeing into the future or Cable trying to connect with her in any way possible to almost stop this event from happening, warn her. Magneto has a conversation with Sebastian Shaw where he kind of drops some facts on him about how nations let their leaders become terrorists, and then is astonished by how Rogue looks when she arrives. While this is happening, Gambit, who is also attending this in a white suit, stands up too, but she ultimately chooses Magneto at this point, when then Magneto starts to levitate towards her, which goes back to earlier in the episode when Magneto poked fun at Gambit for not being able to fly and is bound to gravity. The frame here is great because we see the skin-on-skin contact and the electricity between Magneto and Rogue, framing Gambit in the middle of it until he walks away. While they're doing some sort of intimate dance in the air, I do have to remind everybody that this was a bit sexual, and this is on Disney Plus. Madeline Pryor is hit with some sonic blast to the head, and so is Jean Grey. Madeline's nose starts to bleed, and this is where the episode starts to take a huge turn of events. Within all the fireworks and festivities going on, we get Cable in a panic. Cable tries to get everyone to safety and says he's coming. However, we don't exactly know who he is. Perhaps it's Apocalypse, maybe? His temporal cube starts to emit and Cable says, "Not again." I see all over the internet that this could be Mystique, Cassandra Nova, Apocalypse, Bastion, who Bastion is seen in a brief framing section, so he could have been part of this because, you know, he's there at the day of the event. I wonder if Cable has been trying to stop this and is just unsuccessful or what. We do get this very emotional scene between Cable and Madeline Pryor until Cable is teleported away and then the gala is attacked. And this is just a horrific event led by a wild Sentinel. Banshee is seen assisting and helping save the mutants until he is easily vaporized by a Sentinel. Nightcrawler, in a clutch moment, saves Magneto, Rogue, and Gambit. And when Rogue realizes she can't touch Nightcrawler to check his pulse because she lost her gloves, Gambit checks his pulse and reassures that Nightcrawler is alive. Between all this, we just see the once safe haven and beautiful land completely under fire, under smoke, and just destroyed. Magneto asks Gambit how many have perished, and Gambit responds with so many. We see some of the fallen like Sebastian Shaw, Dazzler, Squid Boy, and Callisto. Some of the people running away from the Sentinel are just vaporized in seconds, and just when we start to think there's hope from the X-Men, Magneto is overpowered and knocks into the Charles Xavier statue, crushing a group of mutants. In this act, he starts to have flashes of anger. One scene in specific is him as a child in Auschwitz, and he says they will be avenged and uses the train that was highlighted earlier as a way to fight the Sentinel, and of course, like I said, saying they will be avenged. Gambit saves Leech and friends after Leech says Magneto promised that they would be okay. In a final stand, Magneto protects some mutants, and Magneto uses his powers to shield Rogue and Gambit and tells Leech, do not be afraid, ultimately looking like he is sacrificing himself. In this act, Rogue is so upset she flies towards the Sentinel until Gambit uses his motorcycle to knock her out of the way and eventually charges the Sentinel until he is stabbed by it, sacrificing himself. But he turns the wild Sentinel into explosive and says, the name's Gambit, remember it, blowing the Sentinel up and ultimately saving what's left of the city. The remaining X-Men that aren't there, like Logan, Beast, Morph, watch this on TV while Cyclops screams how many were lost, and we don't actually get the amount of people that were lost. I wonder if they'll allude to that in the next episode, but it seems like so many were lost. And this shot got me. The final shot looks to see Rogue crying over Gambit's dead body, saying, I can't feel you, which is actually the first time she has skin-on-skin contact with Gambit. The saddest part of this is Gambit sacrificed himself without knowing Rogue chooses him, and Rogue's line, I can't feel you, echoes both Vision's line to Wanda when he says, I can only feel you, and Wanda's line to Vision, I can feel you. Might I add, during the sexual dance, after Magneto and Rogue share a kiss, Rogue references what Gambit says earlier, that some things are bigger than just touch. And it's just so sad that Gambit didn't know that. But it just shows how much he cared about her because he was willing to sacrifice his life even for a friend. But this episode was crazy. It just so much happened. And I thought the first three were wild and so much was going on, but this one just goes crazy. And they're teasing so much more. So, I don't know. Do you guys think that Magneto is dead? Or do you think Gambit's dead? Do you think they'll come back? Do you think they'll do some type of time travel angle with Cable and Bishop to kind of bring them back and stop this event? I don't know. I just can't see Gambit and Magneto being dead with a confirmed season 2 and a possible season 3. I don't know. But you let me know down below what you thought of this episode. My favorite episode by far. Leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Have an incredible day.